Before we dive into today's intense story, a quick reminder, over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but aren't subscribed. If you enjoy content like this, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And if you find this story gripping, don't forget to like the video. It really helps us out. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd one day be sitting here, alone in a house that feels more like a museum than a home, recounting the unraveling of my marriage, I would have laughed in disbelief. My name is Vanessa, and this is the story of how my husband, the man I once believed to be my partner for life, betrayed me in a way I never thought possible, and how I learned to take back control. Piece by piece, I met Logan when I was 26. I was working as a graphic designer for a local marketing agency in Charlotte, North Carolina. Logan came in as a client, needing branding for the startup tech company he had co-founded. He was charming, attentive, and incredibly driven. At first, I was cautious. He was handsome and seemed used to getting his way. But over time, he wore me down with his persistence and warmth. We started dating shortly after his campaign wrapped, and a year later, we were married. The first 3 years were, admittedly, wonderful. He encouraged my career, supported my goals, and made me feel seen. We bought a modest house just outside the city and spent weekends remodeling it ourselves. We laughed often, shared a love for travel, and spoke about starting a family. I genuinely believed we were building something unbreakable. Then came year for. It started small, missed dinners, a sudden influx of late-night meetings, his phone never leaving his side. Logan told me it was a work stress. He was under pressure to expand the company, land new investors. I wanted to believe him. I really did. I remember once he came home at 11 p.m., eyes bloodshot, and clothes smelling faintly of perfume, not mine. When I questioned him, he sighed and accused me of being paranoid. I work with women, Vanessa. That doesn't mean I'm sleeping with them. I didn't want to be the jealous wife. I prided myself on being secure, grounded. But when patterns started forming, him leaving early on Saturdays under the guise of client brunches, disappearing for hours, then returning home with barely a text, I began to keep track. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. Still, I kept it all inside. I wasn't ready to confront him, not without evidence. Instead, I started documenting everything, screenshots of suspicious messages, photos of receipts from places he claimed not to be, and even an app that tracked his location when he forgot to disable it. It became a silent game of chess. Me quietly moving pieces, watching him think he was outsmarting me. What broke me wasn't the affair itself, but who it was with. One Sunday afternoon, while cleaning out our shared Dropbox folder to free up space, I stumbled across a video. It wasn't hidden well, just a misfiled document inside a client folder. I clicked it, expecting a meeting clip or promotional footage. Instead, I saw Logan, and I saw her. Her name was Mariah. She had been my friend, not a close friend, more of a couple's dinner friend, but enough that we exchanged birthday texts and had double dates with her and her then boyfriend. She'd been to our home. She'd sat at my table. She once complimented my wedding ring and said, I was lucky to have such a devoted man. I watched 30 seconds of the video before I closed my laptop and walked straight into the bathroom to throw up. For days, I said nothing. I moved around our home like a ghost. Logan didn't seem to notice. He was too preoccupied with his texts, his mysterious phone calls taken outside, the gym bag he kept in his car. But something inside me hardened. The hurt calcified into resolve. I wasn't going to confront him, cry, and beg for the truth. I wasn't going to be another woman broken by betrayal. No. I was going to dismantle his world just as he'd dismantled mine. The first step was playing the part. I became the attentive wife again, cooking his favorite meals, asking about his day, pretending to believe the same old lies. He mistook it for forgiveness. He grew comfortable, complacent. He started leaving his laptop unattended again, his phone unlocked while he showered. That was his mistake. I began collecting everything, emails, financial records, business communications. I found out that Logan had been misusing company funds to impress Mariah, lavish dinners, expensive gifts, even a trip to Miami labeled as a vendor retreat. He was foolish, arrogant. He never thought anyone would look close enough to notice. While he slept, I copied documents. While he worked late, I met with a private investigator who confirmed what I already knew and provided me with evidence I didn't have the stomach to dig for myself. Photos, dates, even recordings from a bug, discreetly planted in his car's glove compartment. Still, I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I turned my focus to Mariah. She wasn't just complicit. She was actively enjoying the role of the mistress. And worse, she thought she had one. I saw screenshots of her gloating to her friends, mocking me. Poor Vanessa still thinks he's working. Late lol, that hurt in a way I didn't expect. I began laying the groundwork for my revenge. Not just on Logan, but on her as well. Mariah worked in real estate. I used an alias and posed as a buyer, wasting weeks of her time on fake showings. I planted rumors, sent anonymous tips to her agency about unethical practices. I knew it would eventually reach her boss. And it did. She was quietly let go after a client complained about her being overly familiar with married men. But I didn't stop there. With the evidence I'd collected on Logan's misuse of company funds, I made an anonymous report to the board of directors. 1 week later, an internal audit began. I watched from across the dinner table as he spiraled, phone calls increasing. Tension mounting. He barely slept. One night he muttered, "They're watching me." I smiled and said, "I'm sure it's nothing." By the time Logan realized something was truly wrong, it was too late. His co-founder froze his access to accounts, investors pulled out, the company, the one he'd sacrificed everything for, including his marriage, crumbled. He lost everything in under 2 months, and I was just getting started. He came home one evening, pale and shaking, asking if I had any idea who could have done this to him. I said no, of course not. But reminded him that karma had a funny way of finding people. He didn't suspect me. For a second, that's how confident he was in his ability to deceive. I waited until the night before I left to tell him everything. I packed my bags while he was out trying to fix things with his board. I printed every email, every photo, every document, and laid them out neatly on the kitchen table. When he walked in and saw the spread, his face went blank. "I know everything, Logan," I said calmly. "And now so does everyone else." He opened his mouth, probably to lie again. But I didn't give him the chance. I picked up my suitcase, handed him divorce papers already signed, and walked out of the house we built together. I wasn't sad, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was free, but that was just part one of the story. You see, betrayal doesn't end with walking away. Sometimes the real revenge begins after the final goodbye. When I stepped out of that house, I didn't just leave behind Logan. I left behind the version of myself who tolerated lies, who questioned her own instincts, who smiled through disrespect. Disguised as routine, that night, I checked into a quiet Airbnb outside Asheville, tucked away in the mountains where no one knew me. It gave me space to think, to plan, and to finally breathe. The divorce moved faster than I expected, mostly because Logan didn't want his financial activities dragged into a public courtroom. We settled quietly, and despite his protests, I walked away with half of everything, legally and rightfully mine. He begged me not to expose him further, claimed he had lost enough already. I told him the consequences he faced were of his own creation. What he didn't know was that my revenge wasn't about financial ruin. That was only the surface. The real damage was yet to come. You see, Logan had spent years building a reputation not just as a businessman, but as a speaker, a mentor to young entrepreneurs. A polished face featured in tech magazines. His public image mattered more to him than our marriage ever did. He cared deeply about what strangers thought, about the illusion of success. So I decided to unravel that illusion, brick by carefully placed brick. The first crack came from a story, written anonymously of course, but published in a regional business journal that had once featured him. The article laid out in detail how a rising tech founder had misused investor funds, conducted unethical business practices, and manipulated relationships, both professional and personal, to maintain control. No names were mentioned, but those in the industry knew exactly who it was about. The fallout was immediate. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Mentorship programs removed his name from their websites. Invitations to panels and speaking engagements were quietly rescinded. Logan, the man who had once been hailed as a visionary, now carried the faint odor of scandal. He called me after the article dropped. "Did you do this?" I laughed quietly. "Do what, Logan?" Tell the truth, he hung up on me. Around this time, I started to rebuild, not just my life, but myself. I'd taken a leave of absence from work after everything exploded. But now I returned with a new sense of purpose. My bosses welcomed me back warmly. It turned out many of them had quietly suspected something had been wrong. My work improved. I even got promoted within 6 months. But still, I wasn't done. There was Mariah. After losing her job at the real estate firm, she'd bounced around between temporary positions, never quite able to stabilize. The rumors I'd helped spread about her unprofessional conduct had followed her like a shadow. She deleted most of her social media accounts. Logan no longer paraded her around like a trophy. Their fling had fizzled, not because of guilt, but because mutual self-interest had no more fuel once the perks disappeared. That's when I reached out. I created a fake identity, Clara, a recently divorced woman seeking support. I found Mariah on a lesser-known women's forum and messaged her privately, pretending to be someone going through what I had gone through. She responded cautiously at first, then warmly. Over weeks, she poured her heart out to me, never realizing who she was really talking to. She blamed Logan for everything. He said he was leaving his wife, that he was unhappy, she wrote. I didn't know he was lying to me too. Did I believe her? Not entirely, but I let her keep talking. Eventually, I steered the conversation to a private support group one recommended she join, one I had secretly created under another name. It was filled with fake members, all subtly guiding her to reflect on her actions, her patterns, her behavior. It wasn't just revenge, it was correction. She needed to look in the mirror, even if she didn't recognize the hand holding it up. By the time I deleted the fake account and disappeared, Mariah had posted a long, guilt-laden apology to the group, unaware that the only person truly reading it was me. It gave me closure I didn't know I needed. Meanwhile, Logan attempted to rebuild. He started a podcast, some cringeworthy attempt at rebranding himself as a man who had learned from failure. I listened to one episode. He used words like resilience, reinvention, and forgiveness, never once acknowledging the actual reasons behind his fall. So I sent the podcast sponsor a carefully organized folder, public records, screenshots, and a timeline of everything Logan had done. Within days, the sponsor pulled out, his podcast disappeared. His redemption arc collapsed before it began. I never wanted him destroyed. I wanted him humbled, but more than that, I wanted my life back. So I moved, a new city, a new apartment, a new start. I stopped checking his socials. I deleted the tracking apps. I gave myself permission to let go, and life, strangely, got better. I began volunteering with women who'd gone through similar experiences, some betrayed, some financially ruined, others just emotionally shattered. I didn't tell them my full story, but I offered pieces where it helped. I learned that healing isn't always about forgetting. Sometimes it's about remembering with power, not pain. One afternoon, about a year after I'd left Logan, I received a letter, not an email. Not a text, a handwritten letter in a familiar slanted script. It was from Logan's mother. I hesitated before opening it. She and I had once been close, but we hadn't spoken since the divorce. She had been polite but distant, always taking Logan's side. The letter was short but sincere. She said she knew now what kind of man her son had become. She apologized, not for him, but for not seeing through him. She told me I had been the best thing to happen to him, and he hadn't deserved it. I cried after reading it, not because I missed him, but because it felt like the final page of a chapter. Later that night, I took out the last box I'd saved from our marriage. Inside were a few old photos, a journal, and a wedding invitation I'd designed myself. I looked at it one last time before tossing it in the fireplace. I didn't need reminders anymore. The woman who had once needed revenge had found something better, peace. But make no mistake, I don't regret a single move I made. Every step, every tactic, every whisper that led to his unraveling. I do it again, because sometimes the only way to rebuild is to burn the lies to the ground first. And I was just getting started on building the life I actually deserved. Time has a funny way of reshaping pain. What once felt like an open wound now feels like a scar. Tender, yes, but closed, sealed by time, self-respect, and truth. 2 years had passed since I walked out on Logan. The woman I was then, the one trembling at the edge of heartbreak, is someone I no longer recognize. Since then, I've rebuilt everything. My confidence, my peace, my sense of self, but this final Part of my story isn't about destruction anymore. It's about restoration, and finally reclaiming what betrayal tried to steal from me. After leaving Charlotte, I moved to Raleigh. Not too far, but far enough that it felt like a fresh start. I found a cozy apartment with a view of the city skyline and filled it with things that felt like me, plants. Warm-toned furniture, art that made me feel something. I didn't just want a place to live, I wanted a place to thrive. My career had taken off in ways I never imagined. The same agency I returned to after the divorce offered me a creative director role. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's shadow. I had a voice. And people were listening. But even with the progress, the freedom, the laughter, I knew something still lingered. Not hatred, not grief, something quieter, like an unresolved note at the end of a song. I didn't seek revenge anymore. That chapter had closed. Logan's world had already crumbled. Not because I destroyed it, but because he built it on lies. His company never recovered. His reinvention attempts fizzled. Last I heard, he was living in a rented condo on the edge of the city. Jobless and isolated, the woman he gave up everything for, Mariah, had long since moved on. I imagine he sits there some nights, surrounded by silence, wondering how it all slipped away. But I wasn't interested in his ending. I was interested in my new beginning. One morning, while sipping coffee on my balcony, I received an email that made me pause. The subject line simply read, "An invitation." It was from a women's advocacy group I had worked with, offering me a speaking opportunity at their annual conference. "We believe your story could inspire many." The message read. At first, I hesitated. I had always been anonymous in my support work, quiet, behind the scenes, but something inside nudged me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every woman who'd been betrayed, gaslight, diminished, and didn't know if she had the strength to start over. So I said yes. The night of the event, I stood backstage in a navy jumpsuit, my palms slightly sweaty, heart pounding. The host introduced me as a survivor, a leader, and a voice for those learning to reclaim themselves. I took the stage to soft applause, took a breath, and began. I didn't give names. I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about resilience. I told them how I once lost myself in someone else's lies, and how I found myself again through honesty, clarity, and a refusal to stay broken. I told them healing isn't linear, that some days still feel heavy, that trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild easily, but I also told them they're not alone, and that peace, real peace, isn't found in someone else's apology, it's found in your own reflection, when you can look yourself in the eye and say, "I chose myself." When I finished, there was silence, then applause, then women stood up, one by one, and some cried. Not because they pitied me, but because they saw themselves in me. That moment is something I'll never forget. After the speech, I was approached by a woman around my age. She wore a simple black dress and carried a notebook. "I'm sorry," she said, "this might sound odd, but were you married to Logan Mercer?" The air shifted. I smiled faintly. "I was," she exhaled slowly. "I dated him before you, years ago. I always wondered if he ever changed." And just like that, I understood something I hadn't before. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't have been the last. I simply happened to be the one who broke the cycle. We talked for a while, swapped stories, realized how similar our experiences were, how practiced his deceit had been. Even back then, we parted with a hug, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the only one who saw the cracks behind his perfect smile. Later that night, walking back to my hotel, I passed a bookstore. The window display caught my eye. "Let It Go, Essays on Healing." Inside, I picked it up and read the first few pages. One line stuck with me. "LA, some endings are gifts wrapped in disguise, because they give us the room to begin again, stronger and wiser." That night, I wrote a letter, not to send, just to say the things I never had the chance to. "Logan, I don't hate you anymore, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve peace." I tore the letter up and flushed the pieces away. That was all the closure I needed. In the following months, I started working on a book, part memoir, part guide for women finding their voice after betrayal. I filled it with lessons I had learned the hard way. I didn't try to make myself the hero. I showed the flaws, the mistakes, the moments of weakness, because real stories don't need polish. They need truth. The book released the following year, to quiet success. Nothing flashy, but enough that I received messages from strangers thanking me for sharing what they couldn't say out loud, one woman wrote. Your story helped me leave a marriage I thought I was doomed to stay in. Thank you for lighting the path. I printed her message and framed it. That was worth more than any revenge. And now, sitting here on my balcony again, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I think back to the beginning of all this, the betrayal, the lies, the silent unraveling, and I realized something. Logan tried to bury me, but I wasn't buried. I was planted. And now, I've grown into something he can't touch, something rooted in truth, in strength, in survival. This is not a story about a cheating husband. It's a story about a woman who remembered who she was, and that woman, she never needed him to begin with.